This week on the Communicators, a discussion about U.S. government-sponsored broadcasts into the Middle East. Our guest is Brian Conniff of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks. He oversees Alhurra TV and Radio Sawa.
Well, this is week 2 in the Communicators look at U.S. government-sponsored broadcasting systems. Last week, we talked with David Ensor of VOA. This week, we're talking with Brian Conniff, president of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks. Keith Hagee of Politico is joining us once again this week. Mr. Conniff, first of all, what is the mission of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and what are the networks?
Okay, that's a good place to start. The MBN, the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, is the corporate name for the two brands, Alhurra TV and Radio Sawa. Their combined mission is the same as all international broadcasting, U.S. government-funded international broadcasting, which was to broadcast accurate news and information and news about America that dispels some of the distortions that exist out there. We're a journalistic organization, and even though we're funded by the U.S. government, we're not the government's mouthpiece, and we're not a propaganda organization. We use a variety of different programs to accomplish our objectives. As I described, Alhurra is TV and Radio Sawa is radio, and they reach a complementary audience in the Middle East.
What is your budget? How many employees? Where are you based?
Well, it's a very diverse organization. The combined budget is about $110 million, and this includes the funding for two TV stations. There is the Alhurra Pan-Arab channel, which addresses the 22 countries throughout the Arabic-speaking Middle East. And there's the Alhurra-Iraq station, which is targeted to Iraq with its content and its personnel. And then there are 7 Radio Sawa affiliates or stations that broadcast in those countries where we're allowed to have an FM transmitter. And in addition, we have a robust website and a burgeoning social media organization. So we consider ourselves truly multimedia, and that's the direction we want to go.
Mr. Conniff, what's your reach?
Well, it depends on how you define reach, but the Arabic-speaking Middle East consists of about 300 million people, Arabic speakers of all ages. We currently reach with Alhurra about 26 million adults weekly. It's weekly, which is a very comparable number to the weekly number for NPR, for a point of comparison. And Sawa reaches approximately 12 million people. We have what we call an unduplicated combined total of about 35 million people watch either one of the two radio or listen to watch the TV or listen to the radio weekly.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Arab Spring, and we want to show some video, and we're going to show a little bit of video, and then we're going to have you talk to this. This is from January 2010.
طيب يبدو الآن دكتور إيهاب لا أعلم أن الأمر دكتور إيهاب يوجد الآن أفراد من الجيش بالفعل دخلوا الاستوديو الآن هم متواجدون لا نعلم يعني إن كان بالفعل يراد قطع البث أم لا لكن الجيش الآن.
That of course was from January 2011 in Cairo. Mr. Conniff, what are we watching here?
Well, this is a broadcast from Alhurra's studio in Cairo, a show called Al-Yum, which means today. It's a magazine format very similar to the Today Show in this country. And it was during the Coptic demonstrations that were taking place in Cairo that night. And there were clashes in the vicinity of the studio between government forces, security police, and the Coptic demonstrators. They became quite violent, and there were, I think, 26, 27 deaths and a few policemen. In the midst of this demonstration, the police security apparatus stormed into our building, came up into our studio while we were on the air, while our anchor was actually broadcasting an interview. And they came in and they were searching apparently for protesters, demonstrators, and then they pulled the plug as they left and took us off the air.
So as we saw from that clip, there were definite risks that Alhurra journalists were facing during the Arab Spring. What kind of presence did Alhurra and Al Sawa have on the ground when these uprisings were happening in Libya, Tunisia, Cairo, etc.?
Well, in Cairo, we've had a robust presence for some time, or a presence that was as large as the government would allow us. The Mubarak regime had a lot of restrictions on media, particularly foreign media, and that was always something that we played sort of a cat and mouse game. But we have a studio, and we had a studio at that time. We had been investing and hoping that the day would come where you would have the kind of developments, the movement towards democracy. So we were well positioned in Cairo at that point in time. We have a news bureau there, in addition to the approximately 80 people that put on the daily show Al-Yum. In the other countries, it varies. In Libya, we had very few people because they wouldn't allow us to have anybody. In Syria, we still have nobody. They will not accredit us to have correspondents there. So we have to be creative and innovative in finding ways to report from those locations. Yemen is difficult too. We have a couple of people there, but they'll clamp down on the way the satellite link, the packages are transmitted out. So it's a difficult environment. In Egypt also, in addition to the event we just showed in the 25 January revolution, we have a similar situation where we had two correspondents on the air from the studio. Security forces burst in, pulled the plug, took them off the air, and threatened their lives. People were literally jumping off of the building onto the next building's balcony in order to escape the thugs in this case. So it's been a dangerous environment. Libya has been obviously a dangerous environment to operate. We had a correspondent, Sawa correspondent, actually radio correspondent, that accompanied the rebels as they made their march forward. So it's been an exciting time for us. It's one of the reasons we think we were created is for the day that these events would be taking place, but it's not been without its challenges and risks.
And when the organizations were created, it was really in the darkest days of the Iraq War, right around 2004,
right.
When Alhurra and Al Sawa were put together. And from everything that I've read, it seemed like it was really a reaction to other Arabic news channels like Al Jazeera, who I think American officials felt were kind of smearing the United States in their broadcasts. Since then, the brand of Al Jazeera has begun to be received really differently in the United States. How would you differentiate Al Sawa and Alhurra and Radio Sawa's message from the Al Jazeera message?
Well, you made a comment about the change in perception about the Al Jazeera. I think that's primarily the English channel. I think that that doesn't, as I understand it, Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English are editorially managed completely separate. So I'm not sure that one has to do that much with the other. But you're right. The media environment has changed drastically in the Middle East over the last year or so. What used to be state-controlled media is now, in some cases, there is no control. New stations are cropping up overnight, not necessarily with quality products, but an already cluttered environment has become even more filled with new channels. And most of it is probably not of high editorial quality. So we still think we have a solid role. Also, as I mentioned in the introduction, Alhurra, in addition to just practicing good journalism, also has a role to describe America. America is really grossly misunderstood. American culture, American values, American society is really grossly misunderstood in the Middle East. And that's one of the things we try to do. Al Jazeera is not interested in doing that. BBC isn't interested in doing that. French 24 isn't. There are so many Arabic stations in the Middle East, but they're not really interested in explaining America. And I think that giving people that accurate information about America And it's the society, but also the political consequences. There's no secret that America's foreign policy is criticized widely in the region. But one of the things we try to do is we explain how it happens, how it's developed, how it's debated. We present different sides of the story. And through that, and people want that they don't just want to know what the official press release is from the State Department. They want to know, how did this come about? How is it that Secretary Clinton has to go in front of a House committee and answer questions? That's a fascinating concept, that separation of branches of government like that. So part of our mission, which Al Jazeera and others, to get back to your original question, aren't interested in, is to explain the American democratic experience.
And how do you deal with the incredibly fraught topic of Israel and the Palestinian territories when you know that your audience is going to be largely incredibly critical of what American policy is? Do you carry some of this criticism in your broadcasts?
That's a very good question. We cover it just like we cover everything else in a journalistically sound way. But as you can imagine, a lot of the media in the Arab world doesn't cover Israel in a full, balanced way. So a lot of times, as your question indicates, when they see us do that, they don't like it. And we are criticized in the Middle East for that. But that's journalism. You got to show both sides. But we've had some successes too. We've had cases where we've had an Israeli guest on with, we even had one time with an Iranian guest. I'm not sure they knew it was happening and then actually the plug was pulled. But we've had Saudis on. We've had people who traditionally do not want to appear or debate issues with an Israeli guest. We've been able to get them together, and it's been successful. So, the knee-jerk reaction is why you're covering Israel. But I think in most people's hearts, when they hear the full story, they know it and they appreciate it. They may publicly take a position that they don't like that because that's what people expect them to say. But people keep coming back and they keep watching the show. Our audience has held firm, as I said, at about 26 million for 3 or 4 years, which in the face of all the competitors that have been launched in recent years, we're quite happy with.
And has the Arab Spring changed your editorial priorities at all?
Yeah, I think it has. First of all, we went to almost all breaking news for months and months, which was, once again, one of the reasons we were created for. We had the infrastructure, as we talked about in Cairo and some other places, so we were ready for that. But now we have been sitting down and thinking, okay, what kind of programs, what kind of information do the people want and need? So we have been scrapping old programs that have sort of outlived their usefulness, and we're developing new programs. We're developing a reality show that follows 2 young people in the Egyptian Revolution as the process goes forward, hopefully into democracy. So yes, our programming is reflecting and will even more so reflect the events of the Arab Spring.
Brian Conniff, did the Arab Spring increase your viewership?
Absolutely. I think it created a lot more interest in our point of view, in another point of view, in an objective point of view. In each one of the countries where these events have happened, they have been covered differently by different stations because of their political alliances or historical or religious affiliations and so forth. And people quickly realized that we don't have those influences, that we journalistically cover these events without all these other encumberments. And we got an incredible amount of email or Facebook postings that said, we value your independence, we value your objectivity. In fact, at times when during the Egyptian Revolution, when the administration here was trying to decide when to support or not support Mubarak, and we weren't reflecting that. We weren't supporting their position. We were just telling it straight what was going on, and we got so many people. In fact, I was in Cairo a few months ago, and they said, you know, that's when I knew you were independent. When you weren't there just supporting Mubarak, because you know the perception was that America was supporting Mubarak, but we were telling both sides of the story, and they wanted to hear both sides. They expected the Al Jazeera position, which was anti-Mubarak, but they were getting both sides from us, and they really appreciated that.
Have restrictions eased since President Mubarak is now out of the picture? And are you following the Egyptian election process? And what about the post-Gaddafi process in Libya? Are you able to get in there now?
Good questions. It's pretty chaotic in Egypt right now. I went and talked to the minister there, and regardless of what he tells you, can he enforce it? Can he follow through? It's hard to tell. In a way, the lack of regulation is playing to our advantage. It allows us to be a little more aggressive and bold in our coverage without worrying about somebody pulling us off the air. Libya, we have been fortunate. We just started an FM in Benghazi. We never would have been able to get that before. And now we're planning to put an FM for Radio Sawa in Tripoli. That never would have happened. We're pursuing an FM in Tunisia. That never would have happened before. But I've been trying to get an FM in Cairo for years, and I got the same answer 2 months ago that I got 5 years ago, which is, you know, we'll have to wait and see. So it does create opportunities, and it emboldens our staff to be a lot more entrepreneurial as they go out as correspondents. So it's a great opportunity for us as a journalistic organization, as well as for the people in the region for democratic developments.
This is C-SPAN's Communicators program. This is our second week looking at U.S.-sponsored broadcasting services. Our guest, Brian Conniff, who is president of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks. Kichegi is with the Politico. She's our guest reporter.
Will Alhurra keep its separate channel in Iraq after the troops leave?
Yes, we have every reason to believe that that's the prudent thing to do. In fact, if anything, with the departure of the U.S. troops, there's more and more of a reason, I think, for there to be an American voice, so to speak, there. But that channel is very unique. It's much different than the Pan-Arab channel that we've been primarily talking about. This channel is almost seen as an indigenous Iraqi channel. It's part of the local scene. We have the government spokesperson calling us up and saying, can I go on today? We cover local issues. We have a lot of correspondence there. And we are seen as the credible broadcast. We have an evening broadcast at 9 o'clock, and it's the must-see hour. People want to, and it's picked up in the press. Alhurra said this, Alhurra said that. There's been even stories told to me by our correspondents that when the government gives a press conference, they won't start the press conference until the Alhurra cameras are there. You know, so the Iraq channel, and it has a much larger viewing percentage ship than the rest of the channel. It is a primary source of information in Iraq, whereas Alhurra Pan-Arab is more of an alternative source of information, plays a slightly different role. So I see it continuing.
Well, Mr. Conniff, are you required to present the official government position on issues in Iraq or across the Middle East on Alhurra?
No, there's no requirement. Our purpose, our mission is to describe journalistically the events of the day. There's nothing that says we have to present the American foreign policy, but I mean that's a huge reason why we exist, because people want to know what is the American position. They want it explained, and they wanted to know how it came about. They want to know, is it unified? They want to know all those answers that they're not getting from local media. So it's not a requirement in that sort of legislative sense, but that is why we exist, to give the people the information that they want and information in a way that they can rely on.
Alhurra has come under fire in the past, both for running Hezbollah speeches and for employing top executives that didn't know Arabic or weren't really familiar with Arabic media. I think both of those show the difficult needle that Alhurra is trying to thread. It's a difficult path. How do you find your talent, and how do you make sure that they don't fall on either side of that tricky path?
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough, and recruitment is a very difficult issue. Obviously, we don't pay the kind of salaries some of our competitors can pay out there. And as you probably know, there's some new channels that are going to be started in the next year, and they've already come and I guess paid us the greatest compliment. They've hired away some of our employees, which shows that they think they're good quality employees, but they're paying more money. But you're right, in the early going there were some lapses, some editorial lapses. The station, as you mentioned earlier, was sort of rushed on the air in the middle of the Iraq War, which probably wasn't, in hindsight, the best time to launch it in terms of dealing with some of these issues. But since those lapses occurred, we have worked very hard to hire the right people, train them. We brought in the University of Missouri's School of Journalism on a almost every 6 months basis to help explain our journalism. We've rewritten our code of ethics. We've come up with new editorial procedures that have editorial controls, so some of those problems won't occur again. If you react to a problem and build a structure to keep it from happening again, you're stronger in the long run. And I think that's where we are today.
Mr. Conniff, in September 2010, the Foreign Relations Committee, or in 2010, the Foreign Relations Committee came out with a report talking about Alhurra. This is what they had to say. Given the crowded media environment in the Middle East, either greater resources must be devoted to marketing and promotion, or additional programming changes must be enacted. Should these efforts fail to improve the overall viewership levels, policymakers will have to decide if continuing Alhurra's operations is worth the cost.
Well, I think the importance of marketing is we agree with that. The environment is such that there are 300, 400, 500 channels out there. And a lot of times when we conduct research, the Oversight Board conducts research, and they generally use AC Nielsen or their affiliates, so they're reputable companies. They'll find that it is a crowded marketplace out there. So we have been doing as much as we can of late, actually, to set aside whatever we can for promotion. Because if they don't know you exist, they can't watch you. They're not going to watch you. But we've hired some good people lately that have been looking to take the little money we have and make the most of it. We're getting on electronic program guides. There are Facebook and social media is creating a whole new opportunity to bring in an audience that may never have seen you on TV, but is going to watch you on Facebook or YouTube. Just this morning, I was looking at a YouTube video of a package that we put on air, and in 2 days it had 100,000 views. So this cross-referencing of social media, there are ways, smart ways of marketing without huge increases in money. But I agree with the sentiment of the report. That is the answer, is you need to get out there. I think we have a quality product. I think sometimes people just have never seen it, and once they've seen it, they'll say, I'll make this part of my regular watching.
Should Americans be allowed to watch Alhurra?
Well, there is a law, the Smith-Mundt Act, that right now prevents the BBC, VOA, or any of the other U.S.-funded services from broadcasting. I have no problem with it. They can watch Alhurra. I'm sorry, they can watch Al Jazeera. They can watch Al Arabiya. There's a whole slew of Arabic language channels on Dish and other cable systems. I don't see why we couldn't be on it.
Mr. Conniff, the umbrella organization, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, is in the midst of rethinking the whole structure of all of those U.S.-backed media organizations, maybe centralizing them. There's been talk of, a central CNN brain that would be behind all of them. I know it's early days, but how are those moves likely to affect Alhurra and Radio Sawa?
Well, I don't know much more about it than what you've just said, but we're certainly open to anything that creates greater efficiency and greater effectiveness. with minor exceptions, we're the only one of all of those broadcasters that broadcast in Arabic, and we're the dominant one in TV too. The others do a little bit of TV. And in fact, during the Arab Spring and other news events, we share our products all the time, our video products. We make our correspondents available for interviews so VOA can have an on-the-ground voice to describe what is happening. And it leverages resources collectively to a much larger audience. And I'm sure there's more we can do, but I'm all in favor of trying to get as many eyeballs on our product as we can.
Brian Conniff, one of the strengths of VOA, especially during the Cold War, was secret listeners. Does Alhurra or Radio Sawa have a secret audience out there?
That's a really interesting question. I think they do. I've seen pictures of whenever there's an event, maybe President Obama's Cairo speech, and the AP and some of the other services will show a picture of people in a coffee shop or a tea room, a shisha bar, watching President Obama. And a lot of times it's Alhurra. It's amazing. And there's a number of them that came out of Gaza. And I'm thinking, I bet you if you went down the street, now they didn't know they were being having their picture taken. If you went down the street and asked most of those people in that coffee shop if they watched Alhurra, they would say no, but they were sitting there watching it. And so I think there is a secret audience because of some of the reasons that Keish brought up earlier, that, it's an American funded channel, so we don't want to acknowledge that we watch it.
And you had mentioned that you're using social media for promoting the channels themselves, but how much are you using social media to actually get the news out? Because that is part of the larger changes that Walter Isaacson, the chairman of the BBG, is talking about.
Absolutely. Walter Isaacson and the entire board has been a huge proponent of social media. They've emphasized it. They brought in technical resources, know-how. We've probably hired 8 or 9 people in the last year to do this. And from a standing start, we have about 200,000 fans in Sawa, Alhurra, and then the most popular show, Al-Yum. We're constantly getting 100,000 hits on a YouTube video. We're getting very interesting discussion on Facebook. We're now trying to go to the next level, which is to not just push out, but bring in and use the content from the viewers. In the Middle East, that's what's lacking. There isn't a history of media interaction. And I think particularly among the younger people and women, people that haven't had a voice, they're hungry to have a voice. And I think social media will be perfect to bring them into our environment. And that's our next step. That's what we're working on now. We've recently bought some software that will help us do that. But that is our future, because it gets us into new demographics that we're currently not strong. Right now, most news channels viewers are middle-aged males. Well, that's not the future of the Middle East. So social media gives us an opportunity to get at youth. Of the people who watch or use our social media, 75% are less than 34, whereas the people who watch TV are 55 and older. So it's a great opportunity to leverage a whole new audience for us.
Mr. Conniff, Alhurra and Radio Sawa were founded during the Bush administration, during the Iraq War. Do you find the level of support from the Obama administration to be the same?
It's essentially been the same. It's not, to me, the support comes from Congress. That's when the appropriation comes. Now, that money has to be requested by the administration. This administration has stayed at the same level of support as the prior one. So there's been no real difference. Historically, international broadcasting hasn't really been influenced by partisan politics, which has been to our collective advantage. We would like to have President Obama come on our air. I don't think he's holding it against us. He hasn't been on the other organizations either. We had Valerie Jarrett on during our 9/11 coverage. So we have people in the White House. We have people in the NSC that come on. We have State Department on all the time. We've had Secretary Clinton on numerous times. So the administration is there, but they treat us like any other organization. I don't want to have special favors, because if I get special favors, then it's going to look that way and it's going to show that way, and we're going to lose audience. I want to earn our credibility.
Brian Conniff is president of the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, Alhurra and Radio Sawa. Keach Hagee is a reporter with Politico. Thank you both for being on the Communicators.
Thank you for having me.
On C